Yeah, so we are live. Okay, so on today's DotVVM community meetup, I will be talking about DotVVM 4.0, which was released yesterday. We had a lot of public preview versions, and this release took us quite long. Originally, we thought that it will be released in December, but we still wanted to make sure that .vvm 4.0 is stable enough. So we have tested it on several large .vvm projects, and we wanted to make sure that the upgrade process is smooth, that everything works, that there is not many breaking changes. So, and I have to say that it was the smoothest upgrade experience which we have in .vvm so far, because I remember how difficult it was to migrate from version 1 to version 2, and between 2 and 3 there were also quite a lot of breaking changes or tiny little things that were behaving differently. So you had to click through all the pages in your app to see what's different, what has broken, and things like that. So between 3 and 4, we didn't see many of these issues. Of course, there were some tiny bits that could stop working, but overall, the experience was quite good. It's also because we haven't been doing many significant changes in the core of .vvm, and we focused on adding new features. So this release is full of new features. So let's see what we have on today's program. If somebody is new here on these .vvm community calls, so .vvm is a framework that can be used to build new web applications. If you like model view model approach, then .vvm is a cool to use web framework that will allow you to build applications using this pattern. So if you are used on MVVM, like from WPF or Silverlight or Xamarin, .vvm is using the same pattern. And if you have old web forms applications you would like to modernize and get them to .NET Core or .NET 6, 5, 6, 7 maybe, then you can use .vvm, because .vvm still supports the old framework versions. Yeah, so you can install .vvm in your existing project, then do the modernization, like remove ASPX pages, replace them with .vvm alternatives. And when you get rid of all dependencies of system.web, which is not part of .NET Core, then you can just upgrade your project to .NET 6, and .vvm will still work, and everything will be ready for taking advantage of new features that Microsoft has added to the new versions of .NET. So yesterday we have released .vvm 4.0, including all commercial packages. So you will find the Bootstrap controls, which has new release for .vvm 4.0. Make sure that if you look at all the NuGet packages you have installed, that the first two numbers of the version are the same. Like .vvm Bootstrap 4.0 is compatible with .vvm 4.0. If you will be trying to use like .vvm framework 3.1 with .vvm controls Bootstrap 4.0, it won't work. Yeah, so the major and minor release must be the same. If you upgrade everything to the latest version like 4.0, then everything should work together, and it's tested on several large projects we have, so it should be without problems. We have new business pack, Bootstrap controls, both versions for Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4. So everything should support. And if you have been using .vvm contrib controls or any other .vvm related packages, we have this time made sure that everything is upgraded onto version .vvm 4.0. So you should be able to get all your packages with the latest version. So basically, there are several new areas we focused on, and I will show you just some of them because there is a lot of news. So the first, I will be showing how to build controls in a more easy way, and then we will be digging into .vvm codebase, because there is one feature which you may want to use if you are building your own controls. This is called control capabilities. So you will see some of the capabilities, how to implement them and how to use them. Then I will show a very cool demo of integration with React, because we have been struggling for quite a long time that like customers were asking, okay, I have these controls, I'm happy with them, and I want to use them in a .vvm application. Is it possible? And we had to say, oh no, we don't support Telerik, please use .vvm Business Pack. Oh, we don't support Syncfusion or DevExpress, please use Business Pack. So what we have done is we have implemented a generic way how to host external controls in .vvm pages. You are able to pass portions of the view model to the control and respond when something happens in the control. So if you click on something inside the third-party control that can be written in React or anything else, then you are able to like communicate with .vvm. So this two-way communication allows us just to like host external controls in .vvm pages. This mechanism is generic, so it should work with any framework. And right now we have implemented the integration bridge for React. So if you want to use, for example, some React-based chart controls or some planning calendars, there is plenty of React components. So you can use these components in this way. And the support for other frameworks will come soon. That's one of the things we want to focus. One of our colleagues started on working for the Svelte integration. So if you are using Svelte, you will be able to use these controls too soon when this integration is published. And also the colleagues have done several performance and memory optimizations. I will be showing just bits of them, so as probably as an inspiration for you to see what kind of work we sometimes have to do in order to make open source projects better and better, because some of the it's really some memory optimization magic that we wanted to get in the framework so it consumes less memory. So I will be talking about this because it's pretty interesting. So the first area, like easier way to build controls. From the first versions of .vvm, we have been struggling with two types of components. And basically one type of the components was very limited. It could do only several things. If you needed something more sophisticated, you couldn't use this way. And the other way could do everything, but it was too hard and too long and too difficult to maintain. So historically, we had markup controls, which is just a piece of markup you will like put in separate files, so you can reference it on many places and use the same markup on 5 different places in your application. And you can substitute some parameters to some places in the markup. So you could declare markup control, give it some properties, and you could specify the properties in the page, and they will be passed into the control, and you could use them in the control. This was fine for like repeating parts of markup. So if you had a large application and you wanted to have similar looking box on many pages, and you wanted the same structure of HTML, same structure of CSS classes, and to show them some dynamic content, then this type of controls was ideal. However, if you wanted to implement any kind of logic in the control, like to decide if this parameter is this, I want to render this, otherwise I want this or this or this, it was very difficult or even impossible to do using markup controls. So that's it was good for easy components, typically some application specific. It was very hard to take a markup control and bring it to another application because it really it couldn't be very universal. It depended on a lot of things in your app. And the other way was the code-only controls, which is just a C# class where you have all the options what .vvm can do, and all framework controls are implemented as code-only controls today. However, this was very difficult to write. You had to understand a lot of concepts. You had to deal with your own HTML rendering, and there was a lot of a lot of things that weren't very nice. So if you look even how standard controls are implemented, you will see that it's very difficult. If you look, for example, how text box in .vvm is done, it's a simple component, but still you will see there is quite a lot of logic. So let's just for inspiration, if you want to know how many lines of code has the text box control, there is a nice feature on GitHub. If you are on the home page and if you are press T, then it will show this file browser. So I can just write text box and you can see this. So let's see how many lines of code is in text box. This is one of the simplest controls we have in .vvm, and you can see it's like almost 300 lines of code. Yeah, and you are implementing your own rendering procedures and some data binding specifics because it can do value formatting. So the control is not trivial, but still 300 lines of code. Okay. If I look on some other control, for example, repeater, you will see it's probably even worse. Or maybe not that bad, like 350. So it's only a tiny bit more complicated than the text box. However, this is calling a lot of external methods that so the logic is probably hidden there. It also derives from like items control. So I believe that there is quite a lot of logic also in the items control or even this base class somewhere. Yeah, so that's not very trivial. Like we managed to write these controls, but we have the full knowledge of how the framework works, but it's not that simple. So we have implemented a concept which is called composite controls, and basically it's something between markup controls and code-only controls. There are some restrictions. You cannot do everything with composite controls, but you can do almost everything. And it's much more flexible than the markup controls. And also what I really like is that these controls are very short. Yeah, so the syntax, how you would build this component is very easy. And basically, these components are called composite because typically you are composing these controls from some other control. So if you just need to build a control which consists of 3 or 4 other components which already exist, then this way is the easiest, I think. Yeah, so basically there are 2 things you need to do. First, you need to inherit from a class called composite control, which is new to .vvm 4.0. And then there is some bad thing because it's based just on convention. You need to implement a method which is called getContents, and the name is really important. It has to be getContents, so you shouldn't make typo here. The method can be static because you can call it without having the instance of this control, or it can also be instance which has some special like side effects, or you can have some special features using this instance getContents method. But in principle, it doesn't matter if it's static or not. I'm rather implementing them as static, but there are some special cases where these methods can be instance. And how does it work? Basically, I'm creating a class. I want to have a button which has some image on it. So I'm creating a class which inherits from composite control, and I'm putting there just one method. You can see there is nothing else in the class, just this method, which is called getContents, and it's static. And you declare the control properties as parameters of this method. So you can see that this component will have the text property, the click property, and image URL property. And if you look at these types, you can see that the text on the button is value or binding of string. This indicates that the text on the button can contain either like a static value, so image button text equals hello world, or it can be a value binding. So like you can say image button text equals curly brace value and some expression. this was one of the difficulties in co-nodally controls, because in these properties you had to like have if statement for both cases. If there is a static value, I will render this. Otherwise, I have to do some knockout magic. Yeah. So now we have a type called value or binding, which can store either the static value or the binding. And you can say also a default value. So if you don't specify a value here, the default value will be button. We are doing this via attributes because we couldn't do an automated conversion from string to value or binding. We tried and it caused more problems. So we don't want this. Another thing, another property is click. If you click on the button, something should happen. And it's of type I command binding, which means that you can put just a command or static command binding. Static command also inherits from I command binding. So this is for events. And image URL is just string, which means that it cannot contain the binding. Only the static path is supported here. In reality, I could also use value or binding here, but I wanted to demonstrate that the type suggests if the property can get binding or not. So that's basically, that's the idea behind it. And you can use default value as well. So if the property has default value, it means that it's optional. You don't have to specify it. If this click doesn't have, it's not nullable, so it must have some value. And also it doesn't have a default value, which means that if you use the image button in the page, you have to specify the click. Otherwise, DotVVM will show a compile error. And we have built a new Fluent API that will allow you to build hierarchies of DotVVM components pretty easily. So you will just return, I'm returning link button, which is basically hyperlink with some click handler. And I'm just passing these properties to the inner controls in the tree. So it's ideal for composing controls from other controls because you only take these parameters and pass them somewhere in the hierarchy of the controls. Yeah, so I'm binding the click event to the click property of the link button. And inside the link button, I'm appending children. So I'm putting an image element, just HTML generic control. It stands for just render HTML tag image. And I'm setting this attribute, and you can set either string or the value or binding as a value, as an attribute here. So image src image URL. And also I'm appending, there is the comma, so I can append more children. After the image, there will be also a literal, and I'm binding the text property in the literal. And I think I have a typo here, so sorry for that. I will try to fix it. There should be the property first. So so L, you need to first indicate to what property you are setting the value and then set the value. So sorry for this. I had a typo in this code. So the first parameter of set property is always the property on the control, and the second is the value. So the parameters indicate what properties the control will have. So you can use either just the plain type as a string, or you can see I-value binding of string, which means that the property supports only a binding, not a static value, only a binding, or value or binding, which can support both. We support nullable types, even reference nullable types. So if I would like put the question mark here, yeah, it's a interface, so it's not nullable, but it's if you have turned on the nullable reference type, this would work, and it would indicate that the property is optional. It doesn't have to be set. It can be null. Yeah. So we support this, and if you create a property of type iTemplate or .vvm control or a list of or IEnumerable of .vvm controls, it means that the user can specify some inner elements in these, and you can also pass that to the child controls which you are building in this case. So, and the getContents method, it always needs to return either .vvm control or IEnumerable of .vvm control. So you can return one component or multiple components, and that basically means what the control will actually render. And it's a C# code, so it's very easy to use some if statements here or any other logic you may want to. A very common scenario is that you will use repeater here and render something inside or things like that. So you can just build your hierarchy of components. Okay, so there are other extension methods like set property, set attribute, add CSS class, append children, and much more. So using this way, you can just using Fluent API create these controls. So basically the get contents method contains only like return and some long expression with these calls. It's a good idea to take care of a good indentation so you won't get lost in the hierarchy. So let's see the demo. I have created several components. So I'm rendering some form with some string field and some integer field, and I have created these properties. You can see that we haven't published the next version of the Visual Studio extension yet, so this is getting underscored, and IntelliSense doesn't work well on the composite controls, but we have this almost ready for release. So in the next few days, we will publish a new version of this extension, which will support these properties. So don't worry if the IntelliSense on composite controls doesn't work right now. It will work in the next release of the extension. So you can see that the string field, it has the label text and the text property. And what I'm doing inside the string field, basically, I'm returning, I have this form group because I want to wrap all the fields with some other div elements. So let's look at the form group first. Basically, I have get contents here. So I am using label text and .vvm control for the content. So you can specify like the text on the label and what will be inside the form group. And I'm rendering a div with some bootstrap class. And inside I'm putting label control with the label text. And then I'm appending the content that I will get. Yeah. So this will render div with label and the control, which is passed here. And then the string field is quite easy because I'm just calling this method on the form group. So I will create the div, the label, and inside the content, I'm putting text box control, and I'm setting CSS class form control, which is required by Bootstrap, so the field would look nice. And now I'm setting these properties. So I have value binding for text. There is no point in writing like static value in the text box because the user wouldn't be able to change it. So it always has to be binding. That's why I have iValue binding here. Label text, I don't want to be changed dynamically, so I'm just using string here. And the enabled can be either set statically, like enabled equals false, or via binding. So I want to support both versions. So that's why I'm putting like value or binding of Boolean. Yeah. And I'm just taking these parameters and sending them to the inner controls using this set property. There is also a nice thing. Some types like value or binding of Boolean, they have some nice extension methods you can use. So for example, here we have the negate method, which will create the opposite expression. So if it's true, now it will be false and back. Even if the binding is there, it will just append the exclamation mark to it, so and put the correct parentheses. So it will create you the negated binding for this. So if it's enabled, I want to say read only is false. If it's disabled, I want to say read only is true. If you are using Boolean values on set attribute, it will either append the read only, or if it's false, then it will remove the attribute. Yeah. And also, so the validation would work. I'm also setting validator.value to the same property as is in the text box. So that will help me to get validation on this control. automatically. I don't need to. So then the form is very easy because I'm just using string field with some label text and the text property. The validation will work like because the validator.value is already set. The same here, and you can specify the enabled equals false. Sorry. So you can see now this is disabled, and if I look here, you will see in the DevTools that this has the read only equals read only, disabled equals disabled. Yeah, so the read only logic is also here. And when I set this to true, and I can use value binding for that, then you see that it's normally enabled and the read only attribute is not here. It's not here anymore. It's just in this data bind section, but the the read only attribute is not here. So if you are binding Boolean to HTML attributes, it will either put the attribute or remove it. Yeah. If you want some other value, you will have to bind string there. Yeah. So that's what we are using right now. And also the other things are working. You can see enabled property bind here. So like it will take care of the binding. So you will see that this works immediately because it's just translated to JavaScript as normally. But I didn't have to take care about this. I just passed the enabled binding to some other control which has the logic already implemented. So that's what makes it easy. You don't need to deal with Knockout.js translations at all. You saw that even if I said just enabled without binding to false, it will also work. I have the int field here, which is practically the same. The only difference is that I'm also asking for min and max values, and it's nullable, and it can have the null value, which is great because if it's not set, it makes these properties optional. I don't have to set them. And if I do that, the attributes will be here. Otherwise, they won't get here. Yeah, so I can say min equals 5, max equals 50, and hopefully this will work. Like if I allow to modify the age and change it, you can see that it started from 5 and it doesn't allow me to go below 5. Yeah, because the attributes are now there, but they are optional. If I don't specify them, nothing happens, and it's normal. If I omit some parameter which is required, for example, the label text, you will see that I got the error because this property is required. If it doesn't have default value, if it's not nullable, it means that this property is required. Yeah? So there is also validation for that. And also, what you could see, we have the hot reload experience, which is part of .vvm 4.0. So if I do just a change in the file and save the file, the page will reload automatically. I don't have to do anything, which is pretty convenient for building the application. Yeah, so I can do any changes. And even if I just put some changes in the page view model in the state of the page like this, and I will be changing the page and the view model is preserved. So you can put the page in some state and then change markup and the view model state will be persisted. So it's great for testing your applications for development. I have since the DotVVM 4.0 previews, I have get used to just have this on one screen and this on the other screen, and I have the application like always running, and I'm just tweaking the markup and immediately see the changes. It's very practical and it's very nice. The same works for view models, but you need to use this hot reload button, so the changes in the view model would be like applied to the running process without restarting the application. So this is very, very useful. Okay, so these are the composite controls. So let's look at control capabilities. Basically, this is a feature which you will like if you build your own components, because it allows you to create groups of properties which belong together. So, and it allows you to follow similar patterns in multiple components. So for example, in the framework, there is the text or content capability, which can do the one of the typical situation we have on many places in the framework. Some controls allow you to specify either the text property or the content inside the property. Yeah, so one example of that is, for example, checkbox. If I return here, and maybe I can put it again like this, so we see the changes immediately. Why it doesn't show this? Oh, nice. So if I'm using the checkbox here, so the let's do it. Let's do it like this. I will comment out the label, and let's say text equals hello world. So you can see it doesn't look nice because there is some bootstrap stuff going on. I will remove this. Doesn't work. So also this class. So the bootstrap doesn't tamper with how it looks. So you can see that I can specify the text for the checkbox using the text property. Also, what I can do, I can put the text inside the checkbox element. Yeah. So you can see it works the same. So I can either use the text property or I can put the content inside. The content inside has its advantage because I can use other arbitrary HTML inside. Yeah. But I cannot specify both of them. It doesn't make sense because DotVVM wouldn't know which one I should choose. It sort of chooses one, so text has a priority over this, but better behavior would be that I would get the exception, because it doesn't make sense. There are two values and the control magically picks some of the values, but like it shouldn't be like that. Yeah, and that's exactly what text or content capability is for, because you can use it. You can use it like this. I have the string field here, so instead of the label text, I can use text or content capability. And here I would have to like change also this method. So let's put text or content capability also here. And then I am not setting the text or content capability as an inner text, but I am setting like set capability label text, because the HTML generic control supports text or content capability. Also, I need to do the same change in here. And now when I rebuild the application, because I have done more changes in the markup, you can see the page automatically reloads. And probably we have a problem because okay, this is maybe not the good demonstration. Oh, let me change this. Let's try this. Oh, yeah, the other thing. Sorry about this. There are some conflicts of the names of properties I'm using here because the text property was used in string field for something else. So now, hopefully, okay, now it will work. And I need to change this to value here. And now the label text is not present there. Instead, I have the text or content. So either I can set the text property Sorry, one last thing. The text or content capability is set like this in the constructor of HTML generic control. Now it should work, hopefully. Yeah, now it works. And you see that I can either specify the value as text or as an inner content. So let's put it here. And you can see it works the same. So either I can use it as a text property or as a content. So that's if you want to have the same pattern like we have in checkbox, then you can use text or content capability. And basically, it allows you to specify the property like this or like this. How it works internally, that's a very nice question. The important thing here is that you can build your own capabilities. Basically, it's just a class or record where you have these two properties, like the value or binding text or list of .vvm controls content. So if either you will set this text property to a value or binding, or you can set this content and it's just a list of .vvm controls. So that's what you put inside the element. And here there are some methods which tells .vvm what to do. There is a method toControls, which will check that only one of these properties is set, or at least one of them is set. And if we have the text, I will be returning a new literal. Otherwise, I will just return the controls which are inside. And if you declare this capability as a property of some control, then you can specify either the text or the content property. The content, because of this type, it's by default put inside of the component. So you can just use this capability and implement the logic for it right here. And then you just pass the capability to HTML generic control, and you can use it like this. Yeah. So if you want the control to support this pattern, then you can use this capability. You can also define your own capabilities. It's just a group of properties you will declare here, like normal get init. Nothing, you don't need to use the .vvm property code snippet. And then the capability can just emit the controls from itself. And you can just use it in many controls. So you don't need to declare 5 properties in like 10 controls 5 times the same properties. You will just use the capability for it. Also, there is another capability which can be useful. In this sample, to put some special attribute to the control, like my own attribute. For example, if I set like data ID equals something, you will see it doesn't work because the control doesn't support custom attributes by default. If you want to support that, you need to add another property of type HTML capability, and you will just pass it. To some other control, like here, for example. Oh, sorry, no, not in the constructor. Textbox doesn't support that, but you can say set capability HTML, and it should start working. And you will see that these custom attributes are called by this capability, and they will be rendered on the control itself. So you can see that the data ID is not on the form group, which is the string field, but it's put on the control on which you will apply this capability. And that's great because the HTML capability, it can like consume a lot of things. It consumes all HTML attributes. Yeah, so all custom attributes which are not mapped to any other property. It consumes CSS classes. So you can also use something like class dash something equals some binding, and also the styles, and also the visible property, and also it should support the ID property. I guess I have older version of .vvm here, but if I just update to the latest version, there will be also the ID property. So if you want to allow these arbitrary attributes on the control, you can use the HTML capability as a parameter, and these attributes will be supported. And you can just pass it either to the top level control, which is the most common case, but also to some inner control inside. These are capabilities. Yeah, you can see on GitHub that in the newer version, there is also the ID of the attribute. Yeah, and you can see the capability doesn't need to have any methods. It's up to you what will you do with the capability, but typically the capability can generate some controls or provide some helper methods to be able to do what you want the capability to do. So that's it. So that's the capabilities. We have implemented several other capabilities in our custom control packages, and it's very nice. And we also plan to introduce more capabilities because, for example, you know that when you try to use, for example, the route link control, like this, GOT route link, it always has the route name where you can put the name of the route, and also it has the param slash something, and it's a dynamic collection where you can pass parameters to some routes. And now, like if you would like to make your own control, which would have the same pattern of usage, now you have to define the route name and the parameters collection yourself. We plan to have like route link props capability that will contain all the properties of the route link, and you can just use this capability to have the same properties with the same configuration as the route link. So it will allow you to reuse the patterns for controls to have better consistency. So that's quite useful. Okay, let's see the other topic, which is the React integration. We have implemented this support as a generic mechanism, so it's not limited to React in principle. The current implementation supports only React because we have created the integration bridge for React, but in principle, we can integrate any framework. So I hope that in the next versions of .vvm, more and more frameworks will be coming. And basically, it allows two things, like a two-way communication with the component. So you can pass some values from the view model to the component. And also you can respond when something happens in the component. Like if the component provides some event, you can run, for example, a static command and do something to your view model. Typically, the control doesn't have the direct access to the view model, but it provides some events, like when something happens in the control, you can take the value and write it to the view model yourself. So this should help you. This should help you quite a lot. So first, what we have is the support of React. It's an npm package which you need to install, and basically the order of things, I don't know why I have this animation that it shows line by line. Sorry for that. I have to turn the animations off in the template because I don't like it. So basically, you need to add a JS module in your page. JS modules have been introduced in .vvm 3.0. Basically, it allows you to attach a script file together with the page, and the script can provide some things to the page. So the module can provide this controls collection. So it's another, sorry, not collection, just an object, a map. And you can see I'm exporting an up-down component, and I'm calling register React control, which is the integration bridge. It comes from a .vvm.js component React package. And for every framework we want to support, we will have some integration package like this. So there will be register Svelte control, register view control, and things like that. And you pass the React component and some default values. The component needs to have the context, which is the context of the JS module. And then you can specify default values for the control property. So if you don't specify some value in the HTML markup, you can specify the default value here. Yeah. And then you can use the control like this, JS, which is the prefix for these controls coming from this collection. And you say up, down, and it will like call this React component, and you will take the value from the view model and pass it to the value property of the control. Yeah. And also you can say like onClick equals static command and do some handler. So that's the principle. So we recommend to use TypeScript for that because it will really help you with building React components. It has very nice IntelliSense experience for that. Even that I have some issues with React because on some places it's quite difficult. It requires quite a lot of knowledge about how JavaScript works. But on the other hand, it's still pretty straightforward. And you need to like transpile this JSX code or TSX code to something that the browser can consume. We have very good experience with the rollup module bundler, so you can take the demo from our samples where we are using rollup to bundle everything together. And basically, here is the link for the sample. I will publish the presentation very shortly after this meetup, so don't worry, you will get all the links. And so let's see how this works. So I have a page. Let me run it first, so you will see what it does. And I have two React components living in this page. Let's open the browser. So I have this numeric up-down control, which is really large because I put some special CSS style to it. But you can see it's just a numeric up-down. It can count from 1 to 10. And it also communicates with the .vvm page because I can also like put some value, and you will see if I change something in the view model, the control like responds to that. Yeah, so it should work pretty nicely. And also I have a chart control, and when I'm doing something in the chart, like you see that this currently selected item is changing based on what I'm hovering with my mouse. So you can see this. And if I change something in the view model, like get new data for the chart, you will see that the chart changes. The animation is done by the chart logic. It's not what .vvm does. This is just a React component, and we just put it a collection of objects, and it will render this chart. So like it's not .vvm magic, it's more the magic of this rechart control, but we just change the view data in the view model, and the control responds to it, and it can send us messages back. So let's see how this is implemented. So let's look at the first control. We have the up-down, and I have just used JS up-down, which is my registered React component, and I'm binding it to the value property on the view model. It's just an int property right in my view model, nothing special. And I'm setting minimum and maximum value. And because React doesn't support two-way bindings, it's easy to pass data to the React control. So you just use the value binding, or you will pass it as a static value. And if something happens in the control, the control can only trigger some function. It cannot write to the view model. It doesn't even know about the .vvm view model. It doesn't know that it's running within a .vvm page. However, every React control can produce some events when something happens. So for example, this control has the onUpdate method, and it will give you the new value like a parameter in this lambda. So I will just say I will get the value, and I will set it to my value property in the view model. Yeah. So I will get the new value, and I will just assign it to my view model. So when I click here, it will call the onUpdate function, and the value will be written to the view model. So the control doesn't need to know anything about .vvm. It doesn't need to know about the view models. It just calls event, and you can catch this event and respond to that. And of course, if you are lazy to write these things, it's quite easy to provide a composite control that will wrap this, because for these properties you don't have the IntelliSense. So you can write a composite control that will render this, and you will just put it the value, and it will generate this function for you. It's not trivial, but it's pretty easy. Yeah, so and you see that this text box is bound to the same value in the view model, so it works like two-way. When I change it here, it will also change in the text box. If I write something in the text box, it will like change and write back into the .vvm control, because this value binding, it watches if the property hasn't changed. If it changed, the value will be passed to the control. So that's it. And how is the control implemented? Here is my up-down TSX file. You can see I'm using like a TypeScript. So I'm defining like properties of the control. So the control needs to know its minimum, maximum, current value, and there is a function on update, which takes one parameter with the new value and doesn't return anything. And the control also has its own state. So like it remembers its current state, which is this up-down state. And now I'm just declaring a class up-down, which extends this React component. The component has properties and state. Whenever the properties change, the component will re-render. If it changes the state, then it's up to the control what will happen. Typically, it will also re-render, so something like that. And you need to implement this handler, because when .vvm writes a new value in the props, then you need to like re-render the control, so change its state, because when somebody sends me the new value, I have to update my state. So I have to say, okay, I have this new value in my state, so I'm calling this setState. And if I click on the up-down buttons, I'm just checking the boundaries like maximum or minimum. And if it's within the boundaries, I will generate a new value, like increment the state or decrement it. And I'm calling setState. And I'm also calling the onUpdate method on the properties. Yeah, so that's the logic. And here is the render method, which is the most crucial thing in React. Basically, you are rendering this user interface. So the controller renders div with two buttons and the text inside. I'm using some emojis, so I don't need to use any images for icons. And just on click, I'm calling this down or up function. This bind this, it's a React specialty, because you need to inject this object to be the instance of this class, of this component. So this is just technical thing in React. But if you have been working with React, you probably know about this concept. You just need to pass the methods through this bind call, because you need to JavaScript to have the real this in this object. So that's it. And this control needs to be registered in the page. You can see in the page there is the React app module, which is this file. And I'm just importing this up-down control from this file, and I'm exporting this up-down control like this. Yeah, so the module will return this controls collection or this controls object, and up-down, it has to be the same identifier as this. Yeah, so this is the name of the exported control. And I'm just taking this React component and I'll pass it to the register React control, which is the integration bridge. And here I will provide the context and the default values. So default minimum and maximum is 0 and 100. Default value is 0. And on update, I'm passing empty method here, because like if it's not set in the page, I don't want the component to crash that this is undefined. So basically, for all methods, I recommend just to put empty method here. So that's it. The same is with the recharge control. So I have also the recharge component here. I'm just using a library for that. So I'm importing this line chart tooltip line from the recharge library. And like this recharge component, I will get my properties, and I'm just building the line chart with some configuration, and I just get the props data, which is my collection of records I want to render in the chart, and I'm just generating the line objects for the chart. And if somebody hovers the mouse on this thing, I'm just calling this method like props on mouse and putting the name of the line. So then in the page, like I'm passing the data collection from the view model to the control, and on mouse I'm just calling the static command, like if here is the name of the line, so to current thing I'm just assigning this one. Yeah, and the data is just a collection of some like DTO objects as generated randomly, so like I'm just generating some random numbers here, nothing special. Yeah, so you can see, sorry if I have to refresh by Control F5, you can see that this works. How are these TSX files processed? I'm using rollup as a module bundler. So if you look at this package JSON, you can see that there are some runtime dependencies, which is basically React DOM, recharts, this is the charting library, and this integration bridge for .vvm. The version tag still has the experimental name in it, but we will get rid of it once we prove that this is reliable enough. And for development time, you can see we are using rollup, TypeScript, and some other metadata packages like typings for .vvm and for React and things like that. And here is the rollup config file, which tells the rollup how to bundle this. So basically we are saying like, load this TSX file. It will look on all these imports and it will produce one bundled file like React app module JS. I'm also importing React here. So in this output file, there will be, you can see it's quite long because it has bundled React in the file together with my own code. Like this is the React app module. This is my own code. So everything, including the React, is here in one file. Yeah, so nothing, you don't need to load tens of these files. Of course, you don't need to bundle React here. You can use other ways how to get it here, no problem. But this is the easiest way. It's bundled everything together. Okay. So if I go back, like, so input for rollup is this TSX file. Output is this one JavaScript file. If I would be building it in production, it would be also minified. And I'm having some plugins here. So like TypeScript, which will perform the TypeScript compilation. Then this is resolving NPM packages. So this will bundle React and other packages in this thing, and replace will just replace this with some like production string, which will help us with some things I need to pass to the rollup if I'm running in a production mode or in like the developer mode. Yeah, so that's it basically. And if you want to recompile this React pipeline, I'm using classic React tooling, so I can just open it in Explorer, run the Windows terminal, and here I can just say rollup -c, and it will take this file and create the bundle. Yeah, so you can see it's generating the React app module JS, and that should be it. It should regenerate everything. It takes some time because it bundles React together. You can speed this up if you don't include React in this bundle. So it should be fine then. So this is how the integration works. This is the React control, which any React developer will be able to write. This is just the integration layer. So this is what makes friends between React and .vvm. Yeah, that's it. And I guess that we will have the similar integration scenarios for other frameworks soon, because this is quite useful and it will help users and customers to integrate other components in .vvm. So let's continue. DotVVM 4.0 also provides several memory and performance optimizations. So it should be faster and it should take less memory. If you try to make a memory dump of a DotVVM application in version 3.2, you will see that the memory is full of a lot of strings, like because DotVVM parses the files and have the controls and everything. And for a lot of things, strings are used. And the problem is that if you look at the individual strings, there is a lot of same strings stored in memory on many places. Yeah. And that's what we want to avoid. So we have done several changes, like the strings are now interned, which means that for the same strings, we have only one instance in memory. This is pretty interesting. The code for doing this is not very nice, and probably it could be generated somehow, but we have a magic method which is called .vvm try intern string, and we will put it some read-only span. So that's some snapshot of memory. And we want to see if we have to create a new string for it or not. And basically, if you look at this, you will see that there is a huge switch. Like if it's the standard line delimiter, so R and N, then we have prepared a string for it. So whenever the parser finds this sequence of characters, it will not allocate a new string for it. It will just reuse this same string constant. Yeah, it looks very ugly. The method is very long. We have like for all characters or for this is also used a lot in .vvm because we are marking the controls with C0, C1, C2, C3, etc. So this also helps quite a lot. And you can see there are all the strings which are quite frequent here. Yeah, so .id, row, tag, alt, all the HTML elements, all the attributes. And this code is basically generated. It doesn't look very nice, but it helps to like consume much less memory because every occurrence of something like this in the page provided build a new string in the memory. So like you had a lot of strings which like contained the word data. So now there is only one string constant in the memory for this. So you can see this is a very long list of all the things you may need to do. Yeah, there is really a lot of even the property names, control names. These were in memory like hundreds of times. So now you will find them in memory only once. So this is pretty interesting. Also, anytime the user first visits some page in your application, the page gets pre-compiled. Because if we like read the markup and build the controls on every HTTP request, it would be very slow. So on the first visit of the page is recompiled. And basically a C# code is emitted from that, and it's like compiled and produce a new in-memory assembly. And we were doing this because using Roslyn, which is not so fast. So we change it to just expressions, link expressions. So basically, instead of emitting C# code, we are just building link expressions and then compiling them. So now this process is many times faster. And we also save some startup times because we don't need to load Roslyn libraries, which are quite big, like it has several megabytes of DLL code, which you need to like run and compile, and we don't need any of this anymore. So this is also quite faster. And also .vvm does quite a lot of things during the startup of the application. So we tried to make some operations there parallel. So on multi-CPU machines, which is quite common scenario, or non-developer machines, and also on the servers. So the application should start much faster because it will use all the cores or more CPU cores to do the initialization task. So it also helps to make things faster. So the application should start faster and should consume less memory, especially when your .vvm pages are quite long and contains a lot of repetitive code, because it will be in the memory only once. We have done a lot of other improvements. There are several tiny improvements in controls, so route link generates better HTML, so search engines will like it more. We have some other security features built in the framework, so this is turned on by default. It should provide you some better protection against common attacks. It's nice. Also, we have done one change you will probably notice if you have been using the authorize attribute on view models or on methods like this one. Now it will show a warning that this attribute is obsolete. You don't have to remove it. You can keep it because it will not be removed from the framework. It will stay there. But we recommend using a different method for authorization. Typical scenario is that in your init method in the view model, you will call context authorize. It's much better because it's explicit. You are in power of making sure that the authorize will be called on this exact place. If you use it as an attribute, you just believe that .vvm will run it on the correct moment, but there are some cases when the authorize attribute doesn't have to be like run. For example, if the view model implements an interface and you will put the attribute on the interface and not on the view model, then it will not be called because it's not on the concrete class, but it's on the interface. And there are other situations like this. Or if you call some view model method yourself, not through .vvm button, then it doesn't mean anything that there is some attribute because it won't be checked. You have just called the method, so the method will be evaluated. So we prefer explicit authorization by calling context.authorize instead of this authorize attribute. You can still use it. It will be in the framework forever, but we recommend to use this. And it's not a big change. Typically, you have this on the master page view model or on some small amount of pages in the application. So you will just move the code to init phase of the view model and you should be all set. If you are interested in knowing all the changes we have done in .vvm, you can go to GitHub and see this. There is the releases section here. So you can click on this .vvm 4.0 release and you can see all the changes we have done in .vvm. You can see the list is quite long. Like there is a lot of things. Some of them are not written yet, but we have a page in the documentation about composite controls. So it's quite a long list of features we have done. We also had several contributors who helped us with implementing something. So thanks everyone who got involved in this. You can see how many pull requests we had incorporated in the .vvm code base. It's quite a long list. We have also some external contributors who helped us with some typos checking in the documentation and in the API. So it's also very nice. Okay, last section. What are we planning for .vvm 5.0? We have several ideas. One of them is actually in progress. Maybe some of you are using the .vvm dynamic data library, which is quite old. It started when there was just .vvm 1 point something. And basically, it can generate user interface from the data models. So it will look at your objects like DTOs or at your view model. And if it finds a string property there, it will generate a text box for it. If it will find like, I don't know, date time, it will generate some date picking control and things like that. And you can mark these properties with some attributes to specify how would the label for this control look like, or if it should be styled some way, and in what format you want the value to appear, if it's a number, if it should have decimal places, and how many, if it's currency or things like that. So there are some options where you provide metadata to these properties. And the dynamic data we already have in framework have several problems. There are some limitations, so you cannot do everything you would probably need. And the other problem is that it's quite slow because on every request, it's using reflection to see what properties are there, what metadata are there, and that's why the pages using dynamic data are quite slow. We have started working on a new implementation of dynamic data. Maybe the name would be different because we don't think the dynamic data is the exact name for what the library actually does. And we want to have a pre-compilation there, so it will be much faster because the views will compile just on the first visit of the page, and that's it. And also, we want to introduce more features because in many forms, you need to work with related data. For example, you are editing a customer or address, and you want to have a list of countries there. And it would be very nice if dynamic data could do this for you with as less burden as possible. And that's why we have implemented some pattern, which is right now it's called selectors, but we will probably change it to something else because it has some conflict with other things the same names. So this is just a prototype. We will see how it will look in the final release. That's not decided yet. Okay, so I'm in the .vvm repo because it's in some special branch. It's not in main, it's in dynamic data-2. And I have some sample applications for that. And you can see that I have 2 pages here. The primitive thing is this dynamic editor. It's a control where you will just give it a property, and based on the type of the property, it will render appropriate control. So if I run this dynamic editor, you will see that for string, we have rendered just normal text box. For integers, it's this input type number, and with some range, it's the same, but it's limited with some range of values from 0 to 10. For Boolean, we are rendering checkbox. For datetime, we are rendering this standard input type date. And now we have the selector, so we can make a selector for some collections or for enums. So that's nice. So you can see these are strings. This is integer, but it's marked with the range attribute. So the control can respond to that, and it will restrict the values for just these 2 boundaries. This is just Boolean, date time, GUID, product ID, and service type. And this product ID, it's quite interesting because it renders this selector. And how this works, let me see. Here we have the definition of a thing which is called selector item. Basically, it represents the objects in this combo box. Yeah, because you have a list of products and you need to pick some of the products. So the products are selector items, and you declare your own record, which inherits from selector item. And this GUID, it's the type of the ID. So if it's string, integer, GUID, or anything else. Basically, the selector item has the key, the value, and the display name. Yeah. So basically, it's just a GUID and some friendly text. So this GUID is the value, and this is the text that will appear to the user. And if the user selects something, the ID, this GUID, will go to the product ID property. Yeah. And we have created an interface called iSelector Data Provider. And we just say that when somebody calls, we will provide the values here. Of course, in the real world, you will load these values from a database or anything like that. But .vvm only cares about this iSelector Data Provider and this selector type. So once it finds a property which is called product ID, it will be looking for this product selector items. It will look for this service and calls this to get values in the combo box. So you need to define the service, you need to define the selector, and then it will work. Also here, what's the connection between this product ID and this selector? I'm also interested in that it will be some global configuration, like here. When I'm registering dynamic data, I can specify some property metadata rules. Basically, if some property name is product ID, then I will use this product selector item. Yeah, so that's how you say if the property follows some convention, for example, the name equals to product ID, or you can have your own expression like P ends with. Yeah, so if you, sorry, P name ends with product ID, it's the same. You can specify any matcher for the property. Then you can configure how it would look like. So you can add CSS classes, you can change the labels, you can make it disabled. Yeah, there is a lot of API which you can use. And one of this is use selector, which says, okay, this will not be just a text box. It will allow the user to select something. And based on this type, it will look for the appropriate service from the dependency injection, and it will load these values automatically. That's it. So it's not difficult, just the selector needs some collection in the view model. So in order to provide this collection, DVM, dynamic editor view model, you just need to have this selector view model in your page, in your view model, and that's it. You don't need to load data in it. It will be done automatically by the service. You just need to declare this property in your page without any special, just this constructor. Yeah. So, and basically this selector view model, it only contains the collection of things in the combo box. So for every combo box, you need to have this selector view model in your page view model, and that's it. It will look up for the services automatically and fills the data. And if you don't want to build forms like this using these individual properties, because it's still quite a lot of code, you can use dynamic entity. And for every CSS framework, we will have some dynamic entity. So this is using a CSS framework called Bulma. It's quite similar to Bootstrap, which I guess you all know. So same, we have also the Bootstrap dynamic entity, and it will look at this object, and it will just render the form for the entire object. So if I look at this address, dynamic entity view model. So I have this address DTO, and you see that I have these properties here. And also there is other group, like I have set this group name to either basic info or contact info. And here in this page, I'm having like two entities. One will render all the properties in this group name, and the other will render all the properties in the other group name. And it's in columns, so it will appear like next to each other. So if I go to entity, you can see that this form like has two columns because I have made two columns here. And this will render the fields in the basic info group, and this will render the fields in the contact info group. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so that's it. And what's nice here, you can respond to events. So for example, if you put changed dash name of the property, you can respond to changes in some properties. So if I change the country to Czech Republic, you can see the state selector will disappear because like I don't have any, we don't have states within Czech Republic. It's just one country. And in US, we have all these countries as well. Yeah, so you can add interactivity even to these dynamically generated forms, which is very nice. Yeah. And also it requires some selectors in the page. So if I go here, you can see there is the address in the view model, and I have a selector view model for states and for countries. Yeah, so that's it. And I just initialize them. You can also pass them parameters because the states selection depends on other properties from the address. So basically, I'm creating the state selector vModel provider for states, and the parameter type will be address DTO, and I'm putting a function. When this will need the parameter, it will call this and obtain the values. So this selector will then look on the country, and based on that, it will, if you see, if the parameter country ID equals 1, I will return the states. Otherwise, I will return just empty list because Czech Republic doesn't have the states. So you can put parameters to these services if the selection depends on some other data from your object. So this is one of the things we are playing with. Also, there is automated logic for enums. So if you create the enum with just 2 options and use the display attribute, you can provide friendly text for that. So for example, here you can make a combo box for enum without specifying the collection. This is also quite useful. It will generate it just from the enum. And also we are taking care about localization because there are resources and we have this resource file. And basically you specify names of the properties here and names of the display text for these properties. So for the property called street, the text will be street and number. And you can see here it works. Like the text box is for the street property, and it will just look up the correct label in the resource file. Of course, you can override it yourself, but it will do it automatically by default for you if you don't want. We are also playing with the multi-selection. If you, for example, put a collection of integers in your object or booleans or something like that, it will be able to render a collection of checkboxes for each option. So you can check these options and it will put the IDs of the items into your collection. That could be also quite easy. We want to play also with some nested entities or nested tables. So maybe we will be able to have a grid which would be also auto-generated. So that's what we are playing with right now, and everything should be fast because it's compiled on the first page visit. So there is no reflection going on when you have like repeated requests on the page. Yeah. So if I refresh this, it's not so slow as the previous version was. Big data, and we have also a prototype which can generate the entire screens, where you just provide template for a grid page and for a list page, and then you provide just the objects and specify some data store, and it will generate everything for you. But this is a very rare step, so I'm not sure if it makes sense to show it right now. But on some other future meetup, maybe it would be a nice demo. And the last prototype, it's also one of the ideas we are having right now, is to support hybrid applications. Because in some cases, you already may have some desktop application, but you prefer writing new screens as a web application. For example, if you want to share it on the web also, there is a lot of scenarios where it may be useful to have the same UI in the desktop application and in a web application. For example, recently we have been building one reservation system for wellness centers, and basically it's a desktop application because it's used by employees in the company, and it's connected to some hardware like printers for tickets and other things. So it needs to be a WPF application, so it can interact with all Windows APIs to communicate with these devices. But there is a calendar for reservations, and also the same calendar should be accessible by public on the web. So it's UI which you need to have in a WPF application and also the same UI on the web. So what are the options? You can implement this twice, once in WPF and second in on the web, or you can host the web UI in your WPF application. And Microsoft has a new framework called MAUI, which is multi-platform. It works also on mobile platforms like Android, iOS. It works on Mac OS also. And so why to be limited just on WPF, where we can make this really multi-platform? So Microsoft has a support for running Blazor in MAUI, and we wanted DotVVM to offer the same thing. So we have the prototype of a DotVVM hosted in MAUI application. Basically, everything is built on top of the WebView component, which is basically the rendering engine of Chromium or Microsoft Edge to be precise. And basically, the WebView control allows to intercept HTTP requests made by the browser to the application. So we don't need to run the HTTP server because it wouldn't be possible on mobile platforms. Just what we need to do is when the WebView needs the response for some HTTP request, we will just run the .vvm pipeline and provide the request on its own. It's just a prototype, but we have so far implemented some ways of interactions between the MAUI app and .vvm app. So the MAUI app can watch on which route in your .vvm application you are, and you can send messages to the page and get results back. So let's see this prototype. In order to run it, I need to have Visual Studio Preview. So I don't have the Visual Studio .vvm Visual Studio extension here because it's the preview and it's not very stable, the extension right now, but it doesn't matter. This is just a normal .vvm page with some like counter, which we can increment. Also, the page contains the named command with the name increment by, and it just increments the value by like the parameter you specify. There is a link pointing to some other page, and there is a button which can send notification to the host. We have added this function underscore webview.send notification, and you can send any number of parameters in this. So that's how you can notify WebView that something happened in your .vvm application. So that's how you can send the messages to the hosting application. And basically that's it. There is normal .vvm startup, like normal enough, nothing special here. Normal view models as you would expect. And the project type is MAUI. So you can see that the output type is exe. There are some conditions for other platforms. We are right now only Windows version works, but we plan to support Android, iOS, and other things as well. It's not so difficult, and it's just a copy paste from the Blazor with some tiny changes. So this is metadata for MAUI application. We also have we need to include these files to copy to output directory. So this will be part of some SDK, I guess. And basically that's it. And in the MAUI startup, we are just at maui.vvm webview. And here we register our .vvm startup. We need to provide the path in the file system for these files. And basically that's it. And now I have a MAUI page, which is just XAML. I have some buttons, this and labels. So this will tell me on which route I am in the .vvm application right now. You can see it's just a normal data binding. I have added 3 buttons because we can interact with a view model. I can read the view model of the .vvm page. I can patch the view model, so I can send some changes to the view model in the browser, and I can call commands. So if I have the named command increment by, I can call this command in the page and like pass some parameters here. And here is the .vvm web view control, which will just render the page on which I'm right now. And also it can respond to notifications from the page. So if there is like, I get the page notification received, I can do something. Yeah. So let's run the application. I hope it will work because MAUI is still in preview. It's experimental technology. And yeah, so this is MAUI window. It's rendered by MAUI. Here is the label, so route in the .vvm application is default. When I go to some other page, you can see that this changed. So the binding works in two ways. When I go back, it's back on default. And I can click on this button. Basically, this will call .vvm page get view model snapshot. It's asynchronous method, and it will return dynamic. So because we don't know what is the type of view model here, so we will return dynamic, but that's fine. And I can when you click on it, you will see that this is the view model. So I've serialized it in JSON so I could display it in the message box. Otherwise, it's just a dynamic object. And I can patch the view model. So for example, I'm saying like send this patch to the view model. So it will find the value property and set it to 3. So you can see the counter changes. It's 3 now. Get view model state, you can see there is also 3. And I can call the named command. So I'm calling the increment by method and passing the 10 number here. So it's the increment by, and on this parameter, I will get the number 10. And I'm just incrementing the value by this parameter. So you can see now it's 13. And also .vvm works like I'm clicking on the buttons, it's incrementing everything. And I can also send notification to the host. So in the .vvm startup here, I'm calling _webview send notification, and I can call method and send some parameters. That's it. So when I do this, I will display this notification because in this code behind, where it is, right here. Yeah, this event on the web view is called, so page notification received, and I'm just displaying the alert. I'm just serializing the object like this. I'm getting the arguments from the MAUI. So basically, that's how the .vvm can communicate with MAUI and back. So .vvm application can send notifications to the MAUI app, and MAUI can call name commands or interact with the view model of .vvm application. So this is just a prototype. Right now, it works only on Windows 10 and higher, but like in this .vvm hosting projects, we will need to add implementation for Android, iOS, and Mac. And it's not so difficult because on all platforms, there is just some different way of like creating the web view, but otherwise it's most of the things are the same. So it's like 2 classes we need to implement for Android, iOS, and for Mac, and it should work on all platforms. And there will be a NuGet package that you can just reference in your MAUI app and use this .vvm web view control. So it's quite nice, and I think that it may help you to share some parts of the user interface between your desktop apps and between your web applications. So that's integration with MAUI, and we have some other plans for .vvm 5.0. So first of the things is to improve grid view dataset. If you are using grid views, then you are probably using grid view dataset, and you know that it can do a lot of things like sorting and paging, but it's not very flexible. So if you need some other way of paging, not the page numbers, but like, for example, just next, previous, or some token-based paging, it's quite difficult to do. Also, the sorting is limited. If you need to sort by 2 columns, grid view dataset cannot do it. So we have decided to extend the grid view dataset to make it generic, so it will be able to specify custom strategy for sorting and paging and filtering. And also, right now, it's difficult to load the grid view dataset in using other way than commands. If you want to use static commands to populate data in the dataset, it's not possible. So we want to make it extensible. Also, this will allow us to do other experiences. For example, when you scroll down to the page, the new records could be loaded dynamically. Yeah, so like you would have the infinite scrolling feature like it's on Facebook or other social media. So it would be possible to do with this new version of grid view dataset by using static commands. So you would not be posting the entire view model to the server and back. The dataset would just request, oh, give me the next 20 rows, and it will append them to the collection. Yeah. Also, other scenarios like a virtualization could be used because some customers have crazy requirements. They need like 10,000 rows to be visible in the table, and they want all of them in the same table. But of course, if you try to instantiate all the rows in the browser, it will take a lot of time. It will be very laggy. So the virtualization allows, like, the control says, okay, I have a collection. I think there is like 10,000 rows, but I will only load the part which is visible to the user. So that's what we can basically do, and it's pretty possible with the extensions we are planning to do to grid view dataset. So it will be quite nice. Also, we want to finish the validation in static commands in DotVVM 4.0. We have been doing some infrastructure changes in the validation framework, so we will be able to have static command validation in the next version. So for example, if you will call your static command methods and use attributes on the method parameters, the validation will work there same way as on normal .vvm objects. And of course, we plan to extend the integration bridges with other JS frameworks. So if you want to use Vue.js or Svelte or something like that, we want to make sure that it will work well in .vvm. So that's also another thing we are planning. So that's everything. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I will be very happy to answer, and you will find the recording on our YouTube channel, and I will also post the presentation there. So if you need any of the links, just wait for the video to be published, or just ping me on email or on Twitter, and I will provide you the link. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Okay, so seems there are no questions so far. If you are still thinking, or if you know, it's at least here in Europe, it's quite late evening. So if you have any questions, just ping me an email or ask us on Twitter or on our Gitter chat. We'll be happy to talk. And the .vvm 4.0 is already released, so feel free to upgrade. We have done it on several projects and we haven't found many breaking changes. Just to be sure, consult the GitHub 4.0 release. We start with breaking changes, a list of breaking changes here. Maybe important breaking change for you. We have dropped support for Internet Explorer. So if you still have customers working with IE, you shouldn't use .vvm 4.0. I'm sorry, but we wanted to add new features, and unfortunately, this ancient browser is creating a lot of problems. So we had to drop support for it. But .vvm 3.2 still works in IE 11. So if you need this because of some of your customers, just this is what you should stay on 3.2. Or maybe it will be possible by using the MAUI and .vvm integration, because if some users have Internet Explorer and you need to deliver them better browser, maybe you can convince them, okay, I will host my .vvm application in MAUI app and install this MAUI app, and the application will work for them and it will bring its own better rendering engine than IE. Also, if you still need older .NET framework, then .NET 4.7.2, also .vvm 4 we have raised the target framework to 4.7.2. So if you need older version of .NET Framework, please stay on 3.2. Otherwise, upgrade to 4.0. It should be pretty easy. There are not many breaking changes. And we have also launched the documentation for version 4. So if you go to .vvm.com/docs, right now the default version is 4.0, and we have several new chapters. So if you are interested in, for example, the React integration, you can use this client-side development. And here is the integrate third-party controls and React, and it's described all here, including the link to the sample. So if you are interested, just see the documentation. It should work. Okay, so thanks for your attention. If you have any questions, I'm still here, and otherwise, have a nice evening or rest of the day or whatever time is at your place, and take care. And these .vvm meetups will be regularly every month. So like watch our Twitter or make a reminder in the calendar. It's always 4th Thursday in every month. So that's the Thursday of .vvm community meetup. So thanks and take care.
Bye. Bye bye. See
Bye.
ya.
Yeah, see you. Thanks. Okay, so no more questions. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email or contact us on Twitter or Twitter. So see you. Bye bye.